This is Rob Tebbert for Boxing Social in association with Betfred. Delighted to be joined for the first time, might I add, by Golden Boy President Eric Gomez. How are you, Eric?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. So, yeah, as I just mentioned, obviously it's the first time that I've had the pleasure of your company. Before we get started, obviously being a high-powered executive, as you are at Golden Boy Promotions, one of the largest promotional companies in the world, we'll come on to talking about Canelo, Ryan Garcia and your other stable. But first and foremost, let's hear about you. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in boxing, Eric.
I actually got started with amateurs, working with amateurs. I worked for Oscar's Foundation, and we had an amateur program, and that was some 22 years ago. And just started working with amateurs, setting up fights for amateurs, and moving them along the amateur system here in the United States. And yeah, that's how I started.
What was it about that? You said you started working with amateurs. Did you just one day happen on a boxing gym, or was it something that you'd always planned on?
No, I grew up with Oscar. We've known each other since we were 5 years old. So we were mates when we were real small. And yeah, so we grew up together, and he gave me the opportunity to run his foundation for a while. And that's how I got started.
So you were mates. I like how you're using the British terminology because you're speaking to a Brit. I like that.
Exactly.
What was Oscar like as a kid?
He was a bloke, a regular bloke. No, he was always a good, he was always a good person. Very, disciplined to his craft of boxing, and he had his amateur career, obviously, and he wanted to become an Olympic champion. So his sights were set very high, and he was just committed. He was committed, and he ended up getting the gold medal, and it was, the rest is history.
Now, obviously, in your current job and throughout your time at Golden Boy Promotions, you've been involved in various different areas of fighter development. It must be, in that case, quite handy to have literally grown up with one of the most successful fighters from such a young age of our generation, or indeed any generation. Are there little bits and pieces that you remember from back when Oscar was younger that you try and translate into the modern young fighter?
No, definitely. There's a lot of rules. There's a lot of lessons you've learned. I was able to be around him throughout his career, around him as an amateur. And I think that's one of the advantages that we have with a lot of the young fighters. We can get through to them. They understand that Oscar went through the same thing. He's probably the only promoter in the world that has gone through the same thing that they're going through. So for us, it's a pleasure to teach them and educate them and help them along their career.
Something that I'd wanted to speak to you about, as I mentioned at the start of the interview, president of Golden Boy, but you've also been heavily involved with the matching of the young fighters over the years and bringing people through. What one tip would you give to somebody for building and developing a young prospect?
You have to really know their style, recognize the style whether they're a boxer, whether they're a brawler, know their style, and then match them accordingly. If he's a boxer that likes to counterpunch and move a lot, you don't want to put him in with another boxer that counterpunches. So you want to mix it up a little bit. And if he's an aggressive fighter, then, you want to be able to have people that are there in front of him to showcase his talents. But I would say know the styles, really recognize and know the styles so that you can be able to match them up properly.
Obviously, I've never been a matchmaker, but I would imagine it's something that, like any part of boxing and any part of life, really, that you develop a skill set over time. How do you feel that you are different now when you're looking at potential avenues? Are you more cautious than you were potentially when you first started? Are you more aggressive now? Because obviously boxing has changed an awful lot.
It really depends on the fighter. You have to really feel the temperature of the fighter. If it's a fighter that is excelling, then you can be a little more aggressive and match him up and put tests in front of him so that he can keep learning and get to the next level. If it's a fighter that needs a little bit more development, then you back off a little bit. So it really depends on the fighter. Everyone's different, and you just have to really gauge their temperature and match them accordingly.
Now, Golden Boy Promotions are in possession of some of the hottest young talent in boxing. I'm not just saying that because I've got you on Zoom. I would say it to anybody. Um,
Thank
just
you.
run us through a little bit of your young burgeoning stable. Obviously, we've got Ryan Garcia, who we'll come on to, but there's the likes of Alexis Rocha, Virgil Ortiz, who of course we saw return to the ring in excellent style against Sammy Vargas recently. Run us through your current list of prospects.
You know, we have so many prospects. I don't have a list. You got me there. But yeah, I mean, look, I mean, we're very proud of our young prospects. We're always looking for new talent. There's certain things that we look for. And the ones you just mentioned right now are the top of the top, and they have that amateur pedigree. They're really good amateurs. And those fighters that are top amateurs, whether they made the Olympic team or not, but they have that pedigree, that experience in the amateurs. That's key. You can't buy that experience, and especially if they've traveled abroad, that's very big, and it's a great experience. So, I mean, we work very hard, myself along with Robert Diaz, our matchmaker, and we're very fortunate that because of the success of Golden Boy, we do have a lot of prospects reach out to us directly, and we're very fortunate for that.
Now, you mentioned Robert Diaz, and obviously I've mentioned Alexis Rocha in this interview. Now, one of the first times that I'd really heard of Alexis Rocha, he was used as a main sparring partner for somebody I know very well, Josh Taylor, when Josh Taylor was in preparation for Regis Prograis. Now, Shane McGuigan, who was then trainer of Josh Taylor, said that he would speak to Roberto, and there was always a constant communication between Shane and Roberto on how Alexis was doing, how he was developing. Just how important is it for these young prospects at the early infancy of their career to go out and get that world-class sparring, to go and test themselves by traveling and helping out elite fighters in camp?
It's very important. I mean, it gives them all the confidence in the world. It gives them the experience of being in there with world-class athlete. So it's very important in their development, and we encourage it as much as possible. Some of the best fighters in the world were sparring partners for other great fighters. So that's always key. But yes, we're very fortunate that some of our young prospects have the ability to go work out with some of our other elite fighters or our champions that we have in our stable. So we encourage it as much as possible, and it's all part of the development.
Now, when I was preparing for this interview, I spoke to Gabe Rivas, the very helpful head of media from Golden Boy Promotions. You'll be happy to hear, very good at his job.
Yes.
He told me that you were the man who first set eyes on Virgil Ortiz. You, quote unquote, discovered him. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, went to it was a big, here in Southern California, it was a big amateur tournament. And I was tipped off to Virgil Ortiz, and from the first fight I saw him, I was impressed. I was very impressed. He was using the amateur gloves that are a lot bigger than the pro gloves. And he knocked out pretty much every opponent to win the title in that amateur tournament at his weight class. So that was very impressive. I hadn't seen anything like that in a long time. Maybe going back to Oscar De La Hoya when he was an amateur and he was knocking people out with 12-ounce gloves. So that was something that really caught my eye. But what's impressed me more now is his ability to box. He obviously has the power. He can punch. But his ability to box, he really is a well-rounded professional fighter. And he's become a complete fighter. He's still very young. He's still learning. But the sky's the limit with Virgil.
We saw him return against Samuel Vargas. Samuel Vargas obviously has shared the ring with numerous top names at 147 pounds. We've seen him in the ring against Brad Solomon, against Mauricio Herrera. It's kind of getting to the point now where Virgil is really knocking on the door of that top 10. In your role, and obviously the role of those around you in Roberto Diaz, how difficult can it be to navigate that stage of a fighter's career when they're kind of past prospect, but they're not quite contender level yet? Is that arguably the most dangerous part of a fighter's development?
It is because you got to step up the competition. And once he's in the top 10 of the rankings, of the world rankings, then you have to have some luck, and you have to be able to match them up with guys that are on top of them, ahead of them, to get them in position for a world title. I feel that, if we didn't have a pandemic this year, I truly feel that Virgil would be fighting for some sort of world title at the end of this year. Now with the pandemic, it slowed down the plans we had for him. But you're absolutely right. He's knocking on the door. He's 1 or 2 fights away from fighting for a world title.
Now, somebody else that we caught up with, it wasn't myself, but one of my colleagues caught up with Rashidi Ellis, who was very much keen to share the ring with Virgil Ortiz. Now, that's not something that I would be very keen to do, but he seemed very up for it. Is that a fight that Golden Boy are looking at?
You know, Rashidi's a great talent. He's a great talent. He'll be fighting for us next month in August. He's another very talented kid, fast hands, very good boxer. He's got some good power. I mean, I would like to see that fight. Of course I would. But it has to be right timing. It's got to be the right timing. And you have to admire a fighter like him that's willing to go in there against the best, that's calling out Virgil Ortiz and wants to fight Virgil Ortiz. Because, what Virgil's done, he's developed a reputation that I'm sure there's not a lot of fighters that would want to face Virgil at this point. But Rashidi has. We'll just have to wait and see.
Now, one of the things that I was keen to talk to you about is in kind of, not that it's necessarily a new thing in boxing, kind of the political divide, but it seems like nowadays when we've had the introduction of DAZN, ESPN Plus, to obviously challenge the status quo, that competition and promoters kind of wanting to keep things in-house a lot more now, I feel, than they used to. However, we've seen in lockdown Joshua Franco from Golden Boy Promotions go over to Top Rank and win a world title. Now, Golden Boy, historically at least, have not been shy of putting their fighters on other shows. Now, talk to me a little bit about that and the process of doing that and why Golden Boy appeared to be, let's say, probably more open to that than potentially some other promoters.
We want to make the best fights possible for our fighters. And if it means working with other promoters, we're going to do that. We have no problem. We can work with anybody. We've done shows with PBC. We've done shows with Top Rank, with Matchroom. We have no problem. We have an obligation to get our fighters the best fights possible. And we're always going to try. We're not always successful because, other promoters have their agenda and they have their own plans for their fighters. But that's not going to stop us from trying. And when we are successful in doing that, I feel that we put some really good fights together with other promoters. And that's the key. I mean, if we're going to build the sport and continue to do our part, everyone has to work with each other. I know that there's other promoters that don't see it that way and they don't want to. But at Golden Boy, we're willing to work with anybody.
I think that's very well said, and it was something that I spoke to several of your British counterparts, members of Frank Warren's company and Eddie Hearn over at Matchroom about working together and whether or not the pandemic could potentially force promoters' hand in working together. Do you think that could be a possibility moving forward?
I think so. I think that when there's an intriguing fight, a good, solid fight, fighters are not going to think twice anymore. I think that they're going to take it because they can be taken away at any moment. Anything can happen. So when there's a good offer on the table, I think the fighters are going to be more inclined to take it just because of this. And I think it does help.
Now, we've spoken about Virgil Ortiz, obviously the other kind of standout prospect. I don't even know if you can call him a prospect anymore. Ryan Garcia has just been ordered to fight for the WBC, an eliminator against Luke Campbell by the WBC. What I'm always curious to know with Ryan Garcia is how do you deal with, I mean, he's a fighter who's very, very early on in his career as a professional. Obviously, he has an extensive amateur background, but he kind of has the profile of a multi-weight world champion, if you want to call it that. How do you balance that, and how do you work with a prospect who has, as I say, the profile of a seasoned veteran, really?
Well, I mean, we did the same thing with Canelo Alvarez when he came to us at 18 years old. And we're doing the same with Ryan Garcia. I mean, this fight with Luke Campbell is a very good fight for him. It's a fight that he wants. It's a fight that he's been clamoring for better competition. So we're excited about this fight. It's going to be a good fight. And we're in negotiations now with Eddie Hearn. We hope to finalize something soon. But it's a very good fight. And I think that the world is going to realize how good Ryan Garcia really is. because he's got all the talent in the world. He's right there. He's in the same stage as Virgil Ortiz. And now he's taking a big step up against Luke Campbell. Luke Campbell's a very good fighter, one of the top fighters in the world. He just happened to run into two, fighters that are a little better than him, Linares and Lomachenko. But you can't take anything away from him. He's a gold medalist, and we're all looking forward for that fight. That's a very good fight.
I spoke to Eddie Hearn today, and obviously we all were greeted by the WBC news today that the fight had been supposedly made official. Obviously, that's not the case.
It's not true. Not the case. No.
Eddie told me earlier on today, you've just clarified that for me. When the original WBC circular was sent out and the order was sent out, a lot of people didn't think Ryan would take the fight. A lot of people thought that he'd potentially go another route. I know Emmanuel Tago and the WBO route was floated. Did that surprise you? How do you react, and how did Ryan react to people essentially saying, oh, no, that's too tough a fight for him at this stage of his career?
No, I expected Ryan to take the fight. That's the kind of kid he is. I mean, Ryan wants to fight everybody in the world. If it was solely up to him, he would be fighting Lomachenko. I mean, he really is a tough kid, and he's willing to fight anybody. And it wasn't a big surprise that he wanted to fight Luke Campbell. And I think that he's making the right choice. I think that he's ready for this type of fight.
One thing I was keen to ask you about is the development that we've seen from Ryan Garcia under Eddie Reynoso, who obviously coaches Canelo Alvarez, among other Mexican fighters. Admittedly, Ryan's not been in the ring for very long in the fights that he's had under Eddie Reynoso, 2 first-round knockouts. But how good of a combination and how good of a partnership do you see that being moving forwards?
Oh, it's great. It's great for him. It's very, very good. Eddie Reynoso is one of the top trainers in the world. Not just now, recently that he won the award, the Ring Magazine Award for Top Trainer of the Year, but for the last few years, he's one of the top trainers in the world. The amount of experience that Eddie has, it's only going to make Ryan better. It's only going to enhance him. So I think it's a good combination by having them both together. And you've seen the difference in Ryan. He's a little more assertive. He's using his jab better. And he's a little more settled in there in the ring. So I like what I see, and I think it's the sky's the limit for him.
I was actually over in Las Vegas for Canelo Kovalev and watched him on the undercard against Romero Duno. There seemed something different about Ryan in that week. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the Luke Campbell fight. It seemed to me, at least that week, that Ryan seemed motivated by the fact that certain people potentially didn't think that he would beat Duno or that he would have avoided him because the fight had been rescheduled. Do you get that vibe from Ryan? Do you sense that he's that type of fighter who likes to rise to the occasion, to go against the grain?
I think he had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. I think he was criticized by many, and he didn't like that too kindly to that. So, he had something to prove, and he did what he had to do. And we were discussing Eddie Reynoso. I think Eddie Reynoso gives him a lot of confidence. He's a great motivator, Eddie Reynoso. So he's motivating him as well as teaching him. So it's the right fit.
There you go.
Yeah.
No problem. Just final one on Ryan Garcia, really. Obviously, we've mentioned Luke Campbell. The lightweight division at the minute is arguably, the best it's been since arguably when Oscar was still fighting. You've got Teofimo Lopez, Gervonta Davis, Luke Campbell, Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney. How good a time is it to be a lightweight? And can you see those guys squaring off against each other in the ring? You've got those kind of 4 young superstar lightweights all around the same sort of age.
It's great. It's exciting. I think it's the hottest division right now. There's some really good fighters at 130 and 135. I think that, there's a nice little round robin that could happen with all them fighters. So I think it's a very good division, and in a year or two, it's going to be the hottest division.
Moving on to Canelo Alvarez. I'm sure you've been asked this question probably hundreds of times today, knowing you and your role. I understand that you're in the kind of the grey area of negotiations where things can be a little bit sensitive, but do you have any update that you could give on Canelo Alvarez's next opponent?
All I can say is we're working on it.
That's a very good answer. It's no problem, Eric. As I mentioned, I was over in Vegas for the Kovalev fight, and being a Brit myself, and obviously with my Brit hat on, I said to him, we'd love to see you over in the UK one day. Now, I know that the general talk or the rumours are around Callum Smith, John Ryder. I know Billy Joe Saunders was originally an opponent, but could you see Canelo potentially one day boxing in the UK?
We've talked about it, and he wants to obviously expand his brand and his likeness, and I think that would be sensational. We can get something done in the UK, but we have talked about it. We talked about going to Japan as well, and I think that he wants to start traveling a little bit and fight outside of the US, and I think it's just going to create a bigger market for himself, and we're all for it. We're all for it.
Well, I speak on behalf of a lot of British boxing fans when I say we're all for Canelo coming over to the UK too. It'd be great to see him over here.
Right.
I just mentioned Billy Joe Saunders. Now, Billy Joe Saunders was, of course, originally supposed to be facing Canelo in May. We were expecting that fight to happen. That fight didn't happen. Was that disappointing on Golden Boy's part?
Well, we never really had a finalized deal. I mean, we were discussing the possibility of doing that fight, and then the pandemic hit, and we had to stop everything. Everything came to a screeching halt. It's unfortunate. But, maybe in the future it could happen. We don't know. I know that Billy Joe has essentially said he's not going to fight for the rest of the year or something. Maybe I'm mistaken. I don't know for sure. But, if the fight can be made sometime in the near future, I think it'll be a terrific fight.
Which out of those British fighters that I've named, Callum Smith, John Ryder, Billy Joe Saunders, do you think is the most difficult stylistic match for Canelo?
I mean, any or all of them. I mean, they're all world-class fighters. And that's the kind of fighter Canelo wants to fight. He wants to fight world-class fighters. So any and all of them would make it a good match. And there'll be tough fights because, they're championship-level fighters.
And one of the things that I've been keen to speak to you about, of course, we've mentioned the pandemic. As everybody in the world knows, we've been under lockdown, and we've been down a quite interesting path over the last few months. I'm curious to kind of know how that affects when you're dealing with boxing's number one draw. Now, as I mentioned, I was in Las Vegas for Canelo Kovalev, kind of looking around that fight week and seeing the amount of Mexican fans and the amount of furore and fanfare that happens around a Canelo fight. It seems bizarre to kind of imagine him fighting behind closed doors. How difficult has that been for you guys?
Well, it's an adjustment. But, we proved just this last week that it can be handled the right way, taking all the precautions, making sure that everybody's safe. It's just a transition, but, people adapt, so it's possible to do it.
Has it been the most challenging period of your time in boxing so far?
I think it's been the most challenging period in my life and everyone's life. Nobody's ever lived through a pandemic, and you see what's happening around you. And it's been challenging, but people still can operate. People can still do things, and we just proved that. And I think that that's key. I mean, it gives people hope, and people are at home and they want some entertainment, and what better than boxing in a controlled environment?
Just final thing I want to talk to you about, obviously the first time we've spoken today, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. Jorge Linares is returning at the end of August. He's boxing Javier Fortuna. Obviously, we've spoken about the lightweights, Javier Fortuna and Jorge Linares, both right there. That also is a card that's going to be featuring some more of your young talent. Just tell us a little bit about that card.
That's a terrific fight. Two top guys. Obviously, Linares wants to prove that he still belongs, that he can still be a world champion. And I just feel that it's one of those top fights that we talked about just a little earlier in the lightweight division. Any one of those guys can emerge as a top fighter. Linares, he was on top of the world just a year and a half ago. That fight with Lomachenko was a great fight. He was ahead in, I believe, 2 of the scorecards until he got stopped. He regrets that happening. He wants to prove that he still belongs. He wants to prove that he can still compete at a very high level. And with Fortuna, he's going to get all he can handle. It's going to be a very good fight, very competitive, even fight.
Just mentioned Jorge Linares' bout with Virgil Lomachenko, and the fact that you look after Ryan Garcia and, have a keen eye on Lomachenko, as you will do on all of the champions at 135 pounds. Looking at Lomachenko 18 months ago and kind of looking at the development stage of Ryan Garcia, when do you feel that Ryan Garcia would be ready for Virgil Lomachenko?
If he gets past Luke Campbell, I think he can challenge Lomachenko. I think he can challenge him. I think that Ryan is bigger, he's faster, he's younger. I think that Lomachenko would have a hard time with Ryan Garcia. I just feel that Ryan's going to be too big, too strong for him.
And of course, the fight that's seemingly not going to go away until it happens, certainly the talk of it, is Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney. Now, they, of course, shared the ring as amateurs. In your position as an executive, when you're looking at fights like that, obviously we've seen Mayweather and Pacquiao, we've seen all of these fights over the years marinate, etc. But we've also seen the flip side of that. I mean, Anthony Joshua versus Deontay Wilder was marinating, and then Anthony Joshua lost to Andy Ruiz. How long do you let something like that marinate for? Because you've got two American great fighters, but we don't want to miss out on that fight as boxing fans because we've seen it before. How do you go about setting a timescale for something like that?
No, I think that fight, if everything's back to normal and we're past the pandemic, it can happen rather quickly. I feel that I feel that Ryan's ready for that fight. That's one of the guys that he's mentioned that he wants to fight against. Look, everything depends on how he does against Luke Campbell. I mean, Luke Campbell, it's not going to be a walk in the park. It's going to be a very difficult fight. But if he gets past Luke Campbell, I think he's going to have all the confidence in the world, and he can challenge a guy like Devin Haney.
Obviously, I understand you're still in negotiations for that fight, but when can we realistically expect Ryan Garcia versus Luke Campbell? Would it be in America? Would it be over here? Are we still kind of at the mercy of the pandemic?
We're negotiating. We're bouncing around different ideas, but we would look to do it either October or November, something around there, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But I'm hoping to make an announcement sometime soon.
Okay, well, we look forward to it. We wait with bated breath. Eric Gomez, thanks very much for speaking to Boxing Social. It's been a real pleasure to do this for the first time. Hopefully not the last. And I will catch up with you again soon.
Anytime. Thank you for the support, and thank you for supporting boxing around the world.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thanks very much for speaking to Boxing Social. I'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.